Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm your host, Jordan Jones. The first two rounds of the NCAA tournament have come and gone, and the madness has certainly made up for the year off. Unfortunately, the madness got the best of Purdue, whose season came to an end in overtime Friday night at the hands of North Texas. We'll put a wrap on the season-ending loss before previewing the offseason for Purdue and looking at the Big Ten struggles in the Big Dance. But, on the show last week, I mentioned how important experience is when it comes to winning in March. And on Friday, North Texas started 4 seniors and a junior, whereas Purdue went with 3 juniors and 2 freshmen. That alone gives the 13th seeded Mean Green quite a bit of an edge when it comes to experience. And early on, the Mean Green looked a lot more comfortable than Purdue did. They comfortably led for most of the first half. Lead got up to 11 before the under 4 timeout. Javion Hamlet, the senior point guard for North Texas, really wore down the Purdue defense. Very patient in the half-court offense, very deliberate with what he was doing, and he did a great job of finding open North Texas shooters, burying every open look. And on the other side of the court, Purdue's offense in the first half was abysmal. A lot of turnovers. Purdue really struggled passing the ball. North Texas's defense was incredibly active and aggressive. They were fairly long. Lots of 6'4" to 6'6" guys out on the wing, swarming to the ball every time the ball left the hands of someone. And you really saw their defensive pressure get to Purdue with how much they doubled the post, even sometimes triple teaming the post. Every time Travion Williams caught the ball, Williams struggled to deal with that early on in the game. Some few errant passes, trying to pass out of the post to find open shooters. When Purdue did get open three-point looks, they knocked some down. They missed some. It wasn't consistent. That's been a theme of Purdue's lately. And it really felt like at the end of the first half, Purdue had a chance to cut into the deficit and maybe even neutralize it when Aaron Wheeler made 2 free throws to cut the lead to 5. Then North Texas goes down to the other end, picks up offensive rebounds, and Purdue trails by 8 going into the break rather than trying to get on a little run and maybe making that deficit a single possession game. The panic button was officially being pushed at halftime by everyone in the Purdue fan base. They got off to a good start in the second half, though. They put some pressure on North Texas, but this is where that experience came in so big for the Mean Green. Every time Purdue would go on a little run, North Texas never once flinched. They just continued to run their offense and execute. The lead fluctuated throughout the second half a little bit, up and down for North Texas, but Purdue just couldn't get ahead in the game. Travion Williams had a monster dunk on a fast break with 3:52 to go. That one felt like it was really going to swing some momentum. It's got a steal up at the top of the key, goes coast to coast, an and one dunk, flexing in the camera, misses the free throw. And North Texas responds with a couple baskets from there. Williams, did what he's done all year and hit big shots for Purdue at the end of regulation to force the game to overtime. And then, overtime starts, Purdue gets the ball first, and Travion Williams takes an ill-advised jumper from the left side of the paint, 15-footer or so, not really close. And then Purdue just turns the ball over. North Texas able to get offensive rebounds and second chance points. That's a recipe for disaster. Purdue didn't score for the first 4.5 minutes of overtime. Gillis and Ivy knocked down a pair of garbage time threes. Way too little, way too late. North Texas pulls off the upset 78-69 in overtime, and the season ended abruptly for the Boilermakers. Obviously disappointing. We're to this point in the season earlier than I would have hoped. I was really hoping to do another preview podcast this week, but instead, we're previewing the offseason. But first, a few thoughts from this game. North Texas really controlled this game from the start. This wasn't some fluky upset. Javion Hamlet ran that offense incredibly well. And you saw it because they would never panic when the shot clock ran down. In fact, they preferred to let the shot clock run down before really initiating their offense. And that's a great sign of an experienced team that's okay playing their own style and not trying to get in a track meet with Jaden Ivey and Brandon Newman and Isaiah Thompson and Eric Hunter. Hamlet would hold the ball until the clock hit single digits, really. A ball screen would come, and he would either take a floater or find an open shooter. And another thing they did that was really effective for them was early on they would bring their 2 or 3 guard up to Hamlet for a ball screen just to simply get Eric Hunter switched off of Hamlet. That's a part of the game plan, obviously. That's pretty good stuff from the North Texas coaching staff. But it's smart. You get Purdue's best defender off of their best player, and you let Hamlet go make plays every single time down the court. Purdue was really never in control of this game. It wasn't able to get anywhere near comfortable with the deliberate North Texas game plan. They're a rock-solid group. They really are. North Texas earned this win. Just, a bummer. And you really just see how important experience is in March. But, on the flip side of that, sometimes you can see some budding stars in March. And Jaden Ivey is going to be incredibly special next season. Played 42 of the 45 minutes in this game. Had 26 points, albeit on an inefficient 10 of 24 from the field. A lot of those missed shots came late in the game when Purdue was desperately needing a bucket. He's absolutely fearless, and we saw that in this game. There's no shot that Jaden Ivey's afraid of. That's not always a great thing, but I do think it'll be very beneficial for Purdue next season. Ivey finished his freshman year shooting 26% from deep. As the season progressed, though, we saw that really start to improve. Ivey really struggled early on from outside, but as the season got going, he started to shoot it better. The Big Ten tournament game in Lucas Oil Stadium, he shot the ball well, knocked down 4 threes in this game, although on 12 tries. I expect that to continue to get better. That'll eclipse 30% next year for sure. But regardless, going to the basket's going to be huge for him. Sometimes Ivey tends to settle for jump shots instead of attacking the rim. His finishing ability is something that I don't think I've ever seen out of a Purdue guard. Utilizing that skill set going forward is a major key to Purdue's offense next season. And the next level of that is the ability to penetrate and pass it out and find some of his open three-point shooters, because he's going to have a lot of them next year, especially when he puts the ball on the floor to go make plays now that everyone in the Big Ten knows what he's capable of. The final thought on the North Texas loss, this stings so much for Purdue fans and the Purdue program because of how much Purdue exceeded their expectations. Let's not forget, Purdue was picked to finish 9th in the conference in the preseason media poll. To finish 4th was no small feat. There was a lot of returning experience in this conference. Purdue's young core pushed the Boilermakers ahead of a lot of experienced teams, finishing ahead of Wisconsin, finishing ahead of Rutgers. Indiana had more experience than Purdue. Purdue was really able to get a lot of good stuff done this year. This isn't a fun way to end the season. A lot of people thought that Purdue could make a deep run in March. I thought Purdue was going to get to the Sweet 16 before bowing out to Baylor. Not how it went this year. March can be a brutal time, and you're seeing it this year with all these upsets. March is a very hard way to analyze the success of a program because you can look elsewhere. Shaka Smart's 7 years down at Texas, no NCAA tournament wins. Chris Holtmann is doing great things at Ohio State, still hasn't made a Sweet 16. It's not the easiest way to analyze the success of a program. It's important, yes, absolutely, but it is not the best way to analyze success of a program because of its unpredictable nature. You're seeing that clearly this March. Next up for Purdue, it's straight into the offseason. College basketball never sleeps, and your priority number one now is to replace Micah Shrewsbury. Obviously, Shrewsbury, the associate head coach and offensive coordinator, so to speak, for the Boilermakers, taking the Penn State head coaching job. It's easier said than done to replace him. He is extremely well regarded in the college basketball community. That is clearly evidenced by him earning the Penn State job. That's pretty big stuff for a first head coaching job. Shrews has some very good experience coaching for Matt Painter at Purdue, coaching for Brad Stevens with both Butler and the Boston Celtics. But regardless, the next guy who's going to come in will take over that offensive coordinator role. He's going to have some serious talent to play with, and that's pretty appealing for someone. You come in, you have Jaden Ivey, who is a budding star at the guard position, who could be a preseason all-conference guard coming into next year. You have Travion Williams, a returning first-team All-Big Ten center, a potential preseason All-American candidate. That's pretty rare. You don't walk into many jobs and have one of those. This is the same role that Greg Gary had before he took the Mercer job. And when two coaches in a row use this position to springboard into head coaching positions, that's a pretty desirable position for a coach to take. I think Purdue's going to have a pretty good selection of candidates to choose from to take over this offensive coordinator role. Will there be any transfers? And this is a storyline that's kind of blowing up across college basketball right now. We're seeing this in our home state right now. Indiana State has had 6 or 7 transfers. Valparaiso has had 7 players enter the transfer portal. Granted, the mid-majors are a little different, but all 13 of Purdue's scholarships are accounted for heading into next season. What does that mean? That means there won't be any additions unless someone departs. Now, who could depart? This is something that Purdue really had avoided for a pretty good amount of time. Recently, obviously, Matt Harms, No-Gel Eastern heading out after last season. Shaquille Taylor took off after the 2017-18 season and spent his final year at Hofstra as a graduate transfer. That one made a lot of sense. But before that, you're looking at Bryson Scott maybe, headed to IPFW, but Purdue hasn't had Kendall Stevens, I guess, headed out to Nevada. There haven't been tons of transfers coming out of Purdue lately. Emmanuel Dewana certainly seemed to deal with a lot of health issues throughout this season. Very much hope everything is stabilizing there. That's pretty scary stuff for a young guy like Emmanuel. I don't know that there's a path to playing time for him at Purdue. From the very little we've seen of him in actual games, which would be some mop-up duty in games 2 years ago now, the 2019-20 season. He's a true center. He's not a guy who's going to get into the 4 spot at all. If playing time is a major concern for him, I could see him moving on. I don't know that he's going to play over Trevion Williams or Zach Edey ever. You have Caleb First coming in at the 5 spot as well. That's a pretty crowded depth chart just to play one position. With that being said, obviously if DeJuan is happy at Purdue and is content being part of the program, getting his degree paid for, I don't think there's a single person on this planet who could really blame him for that. It could be a lot worse than a free college education from a very good school. Couldn't blame him one bit if he just sticks around. Aaron Wheeler, Sasha Stefanovic, each have been around for 4 years now. In theory, they would have their degrees in hand. Granted, I have no idea where they are in their studies, but if they're on the 4-year track, they would be finishing up their undergraduate degrees, meaning both would be eligible as graduate transfers to not have to file an appeal to be able to play right away next year. They would both be automatically eligible. I'd be 100% shocked if Stefanovic left. I don't see any way that happens. Wheeler, who knows? This is the second straight year he hasn't performed as well as he would have liked. Just shooting 27% from 3 this year. Not a good performance for him in the NCAA tournament game. Mason Gillis clearly moved above him in the rotation. Getting beat out by a freshman is never how these guys want to see their season go. You got Trey Kaufman-Renn coming in for next season, a highly regarded 4-star recruit, potential Indiana Mr. Basketball. Him and Caleb First each playing for the state championship on April 3rd. First with Blackhawk Christian in the 2A. Kaufman-Renn with Silver Creek in the 3A. But, nothing will be guaranteed for Wheeler next season. Could that lead him to transfer? It's a situation that may remind me of Jaquil Taylor a little bit. East Coast guy decided to go back out east for his final year. I'm not saying that'll happen. I really don't know. But, it's a possibility, I guess. If anyone does transfer, Purdue could see itself be active in the transfer portal. I'm not sure I see it happening. Matt Painter's pretty careful with who he brings into the program. COVID situation really limiting in-person recruiting. I'd be rather surprised if this ends up taking place. And, development is a spot where you always look at every offseason, but I think development right now is what is going to take Purdue from this top 25 team to a top 10 to top 15 team. And at the guard spot, this is particularly important. I've detailed on this podcast multiple times how Sasha Stefanovic has truly developed his offensive game each offseason, adding a different tool to his toolbox every year. Shooting on the move, putting the ball on the floor to go make a shot at the rim, improving his free throw ability. He was never the same player after his COVID break when he missed 3 games due to a positive COVID test. He was really good for Purdue before that. And I know he struggled a little bit to finish up the season. People will tend to remember that because it's what's most fresh in minds, but he was really good for Purdue before the COVID break. One of the Big Ten's best shooters, right up there with DeMonte Williams of Illinois and Joe Wieskamp of Iowa. He'll be a big part of next year's team. And with his fellow region rat, you'd love to see more consistency from Brandon Newman. Showed some tremendous flashes this year. The 29-point game against Minnesota obviously stands out, but hit some really big shots and really big moments this year. Ball handling really could use to be improved on his end. Just that'll give him more ability to go make plays at the basket. But I really think Brandon Newman is going to improve quite a bit, and the defensive end could be big for him as well. I know we didn't see much action this year. I'm still a big believer in Ethan Morton. Very highly regarded coming out of high school, but the jump from public high school ball in Pennsylvania to the Big Ten is a tremendous one. He's going to see some serious action next year, in my opinion. Becoming a better scorer would really help him there. He's considered to be a great facilitator. I'm excited to see what that looks like. If he's able to combine, we've seen some shooting from him this year. If he's able to combine that with the ability to put the ball on the floor and go make some plays at the rim, that could be a pretty dangerous player, especially at his height of 6'6". Eric Hunter didn't have a great season on the offensive end. A fantastic defender. I disagree with the decision to exclude him from the All Big Ten defensive team, but, hey, what do I know? Only shot 28% from outside this year. You'd really like to see that improve ahead of his senior year. That fell off pretty substantially from where he was as a sophomore. And as a whole, his offensive game was better as a sophomore. He was very good with his mid-range pull-up game. He got to the rim pretty well. We saw flashes of it this year. And I feel like flashes is the key word right now. But, the game at Minnesota, Eric Hunter had a fantastic offensive day. And that may be your shining moment for him this year because he was so effective on offense that game. And had Purdue won that game and Marcus Carr not thrown a line drive off the backboard that went in, that game would have gotten more attention for the positive things Purdue did. You'd love to see him bounce back next year and cap off his career strong as a Boilermaker. And on defense, this team needs to get better on the defensive end. Purdue is really susceptible to getting torched from the three-point line this year. Purdue desperately overhelped on penetration, and another offseason of continuity should really help that. So many guys were new to the program this year and new to college basketball that it was certainly difficult for Purdue to get comfortable on defense, especially with an abnormal offseason. Purdue was still top 25 in defensive efficiency on KenPom, but ahead of next year, you'd like to see that get into the top 10, top 15. The offensive efficiency should be there, and that alone will make a Purdue, a preseason top 10 to top 15 team next year, you would think. Final point I want to touch on in terms of news before we get into the Big Ten analysis for their disappointment. Jameel Brown, 4-star class of 2022 guard from Philadelphia, has decommitted from Purdue. This really isn't a surprise after Micah Shrewsbury's departure to Penn State. Brown committed to Purdue sight unseen, meaning he had not taken a visit to West Lafayette. Micah Shrewsbury was Jameel Brown's lead recruiter. I wouldn't look too much into this. I know some people will because the timing of his decommitment just happens to coincide with a loss that has really set the fan base on fire. I figured I'd mention it. I don't think this is any reason to sound any alarms. Purdue's still recruiting at a pretty high level. You still have 2 top 50 guys coming in next year. You still have an incredible guard in Fletcher Lawyer coming in the class of 2022 out of Homestead. This isn't a massive deal. This isn't a massive surprise. I think at this point, it would probably be safe to think Jameel Brown may follow Shrewsbury to Happy Valley. We'll see on that end, but figured that was worth noting. The Big Ten in March. Yikes. We've touched on Purdue. We've torn that one to shreds. As a whole, the conference had a pretty embarrassing first weekend. It gets started on the first day. Michigan State blows a big lead in the first 4 game to UCLA. That game goes to overtime. The Bruins come back and win. I think Michigan State had, a 15-point lead or something in that one. The story, yet again, as it seems to be every March, Tom Izzo blows up on yet another player. This time it was Gabe Brown at the end of the first half after Brown blew a defensive coverage. Nothing new there. Izzo blows up on guys. It happens. The national media tears him apart. Then the other half of the national media defends him. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but just tired of hearing about Tom Izzo exploding on his players. Then in Mackey Arena again, the following day, Ohio State falls in overtime to Oral Roberts. Oral Roberts now Sweet 16 bound after they took down Florida. Really rough ending for Chris Holtman's team. They had a heck of a year, really exceeding expectations. And then it gets worse with everything going on with E.J. Liddell's social media. People on Twitter sending him racist death threats. This is getting ridiculous. I know college sports are big. I know college sports mean a lot to a lot of people, but, stop threatening college athletes' lives. It's ridiculous. Liddell's a star. He was unbelievable this year. Played well in their loss, too. I thought he was their best player. Thought he should have got the ball more down the stretch, but, to threaten this kid's life is absolutely ridiculous. Come on. The bad stuff kept coming for the Big Ten, though. Illinois loses to Loyola in the round of 32 without ever having led in the game. Loyola was vastly underseeded. They may be one of the best 8 seeds of all time, probably right up there with that Kentucky team from, 2014 that took down Wichita State in the second round before getting to the national title game. I understand the Illini fans' gripe about Loyola being too good to play in the second round, but at some point, Illinois had so much talent. They had 2 All-Americans in Ayo Dosunmu, Kofi Cockburn, Andre Curbelo, Big Ten Sixth Man of the Year, and Big Ten All-Freshman team. It's inexcusable that Brad Underwood got so vastly outcoached by Porter Moser. Moser's a great coach, but, Underwood had a disappointing performance in that game. And for the Illini, they play a style that is very brash. They are very in your face. They are very, flashy on the court. And it always hurts. And you've seen the social media reaction from other Big Ten fan bases. Not a lot of Big Ten fans are sad to see the Illini go. The Ayo Dosunmu poses in Kobe Bryant fashion with the Big Ten tournament trophy compared to Kobe Bryant with the NBA championship trophy. Those poses didn't age well. You've seen those all over social media. Dosunmu's off to the league now. Trent Frazier, DeMonte Williams are gone. Kofi Cockburn, who knows what he will do. But it is crazy that this group only won a single NCAA tournament game together. They were probably going to move on to at least the second round last year before the pandemic caused the tournament to get canceled. But really, this felt like the year for the Illini to make a run, and they didn't, which is the theme of the Big Ten, really. Wisconsin goes 2-out. They lose to Baylor. An impressive first-round win for the Badgers. I don't think a round of 32 loss, though, was what the Badger faithful had in mind at the start of the season. Preseason top 10 team. They fall in the second round as a 9 seed. Virtually everyone graduates from this Wisconsin group. Davison, Trice, Reavers, Potter. A lot of guys are gone. Will anyone take the extra year of eligibility? I guess we'll find out, but, disappointing for them. Probably equally disappointing for Iowa, getting blown out by Oregon in the second round. Giving up 95 points in 40 minutes is pretty hard to do, but Fran McCaffrey's squad did it. Very sad to see the end of the road for Luka Garza, one of the best Big Ten players of my lifetime. Just tremendous stuff. He'll be National Player of the Year this year. He'll be recognized as he should be. His jersey's in the rafters at Carver Hawkeye. The winding road of Jordan Bohannon's Iowa career ends as well. A guy who's been there for what feels like forever. Obviously impressive that he was able to come back from a pretty serious injury last year to have a good senior year. But with those two gone, Garza and Bohannon and, Wieskamp, potentially an NBA draft guy, I guess we'll see there. It figures to be a pretty difficult transition into next season in Iowa City, especially with Jack Nunge coming back from injury. Maryland, good tournament showing for them. Good first-round win over UConn, outmatched by Alabama, but nothing wrong there. That's a talented young Terrapin team. And the Michigan Wolverines, the last one standing, they're battling without Isaiah Livers. Really good win in the second round over LSU. The Tigers have a high-powered offense. Michigan was able to neutralize that. The Wolverines take on Florida State in the Sweet 16 as the Big Ten's last hope. Moving into questions, our Q&A session. As a reminder, we're always taking questions to answer on the show. Follow me on Twitter @BoilersBeyond to submit a question. I'll get it answered for you. First question comes in from Brian. Who do you think will take the biggest step forward from this year into next year? Obviously, Brian is talking about Purdue players, and that's a good question. There are a lot of good candidates on that list who I think could break out for Purdue next season. I'm going to go with Ethan Morton, simply because I think he's hardly scratched the surface of his abilities. Him getting mono 3 weeks before the season, that was a major setback. Again, the transition into college basketball is pretty difficult. It's even more difficult when you have a very abnormal offseason like what we saw this year. From there, he had to play more than he was ready for early on. Eric Hunter Jr. missed the start of the season. Jaden Ivey had the stress issue in his foot after the first game. Minutes were pretty hard to come by, though, when Hunter Jr. and Ivey returned. I think he'll play a lot more next year. His acumen as a passer and a ball handler is something that this team could really use, especially with Stefanovic and Newman as shooters, Ivey as an all-around star. I'm excited to see what type of jump Ethan Morton can make from his freshman to, I guess, his second freshman season, with this year of eligibility not having really counted. And Brian also wants to know, how you feel after a long weekend of basketball festivities. Said he feels great, but he might have gained 14 pounds. Yeah, I'm right there with you, Brian. I feel lazy as can be. Long 4 days of sitting on the couch, watching hoops, a lot of unhealthy food, not a lot of physical activity. That's not great for a person. That's what this week is for, though. It's Tuesday morning now, and we don't have basketball again till Saturday. So we got to make up for our lost time ahead of the Sweet 16 and Elite 8. I plan on going to the driving range today, getting some golf game in at least, and getting some physical activity before we get into the Sweet 16. The Paint Crew, the best student section in college basketball, wants to know overall thoughts on the tournament and the upsets so far. Yeah, this has been complete mayhem. Oral Roberts, Oregon State, Abilene Christian, Ohio, North Texas, UCLA. It's been wild. The one thing about this is it doesn't make for the most interesting Sweet 16 matchups. I know we start off the Sweet 16 next weekend with Loyola versus Oregon State. We have Oral Roberts, Arkansas, UCLA, Alabama. Some of these matchups aren't all that exciting, and that's the downside of when you have first-round upsets. I can't complain, though. Look, we have a tournament. It's been fun to watch. I do think this tournament has really showed that the theory throughout the year that it was Gonzaga and Baylor and everyone else, that was pretty true. They seem to be by far the two best teams right now, and a lot of West Coast prevalence here. 4 Pac-12 teams in the Sweet 16, and you have Gonzaga. That's something you don't see very often in college basketball. Bill Walton, noted West Coast advocate. He'll be happy about that one. And, it's different for the TV markets. I'm sure CBS isn't thrilled about that, but that's how the tournament goes sometimes. Jeremy wants to know, why didn't we see Travion and Edey on the floor at the same time? And, it's an interesting question because it can be incredibly effective on offense, but it's virtually impossible to pull off on the defensive side. So many teams play with a 4 guy that can handle the ball and knock down threes at a 35% clip or better. Neither Williams nor Edey can pull that off on defense. They can't guard that. We saw this lineup a couple times this year. First was at Michigan State. Edey forced a jump ball on an offensive rebound when Williams missed a free throw. I believe Purdue was down by 1 in that position right before the inbound pass to Williams won the game. And then in the Big Ten tournament against Ohio State, Purdue used it on offense twice. The first time they got lucky because Ohio State was able to take it the other way and try to use that matchup to their advantage. The ball got deflected out of bounds, though, and Painter was able to sub Mason Gillis in at the dead ball so that Purdue couldn't get burned by that on defense. I don't think you'll see this lineup much next year at all. Only a similar situation with, a desperation time where there's a dead ball coming. These guys are both pretty good at, taking up a lot of space in the paint and helping out the shooters that are around them. Purdue tried this some when Caleb Swanigan was at Purdue, putting him at the 4 spot with either A.J. Hammonds or Isaac Haas at center, and it never worked all that great. That's really how I feel about this situation as well. Question in from Larry. Do you feel the Big Ten struggles are as simple as the league being overrated, or is it something else like bad luck or the grueling regular season? And Larry adds in that he feels the league was overrated. I think it's a combination of all of the above. Overrated, sure. I think pretty much every team had a clear fatal flaw outside of Michigan and Illinois, but that's not even what got most teams beaten. I think Ohio State's fatal flaw was a lack of size, and Oral Roberts didn't do that. They just had 2 little guards go ballistic. Iowa was probably overrated. I'm not going to say Illinois was overrated. They'd won 14 out of 15 games coming into the tournament. But, other teams, maybe Michigan State was overrated. Maybe they shouldn't have been in. In terms of bad luck, Illinois getting stuck with Loyola in the second round, that's bad luck. Rutgers going ice cold at the end against Houston, that's bad luck. Michigan losing Isaiah Livers right before the NCAA tournament, even though they're still playing, that's a different kind of bad luck. Purdue fans are well aware of that. The grueling regular season's an interesting point. I think Ohio State and Purdue may have evidenced this in a little bit of their losses. Both losses came in overtime. And if you watch those 2 overtimes, both teams looked exhausted by the time those final 5 minutes came around. This conference is a complete grind. You saw it with how deep the conference looked during the regular season. The style of play is very post-centric. It's very physical. That's not how many other conferences play. Elite guard talent has a much higher ceiling in a single elimination tournament. You can do a lot more with elite guard talent. You can score more points than you can by pounding the ball inside. And that's what we see in March. Some teams were probably overvalued. I think Purdue may be one of those, but it's certainly a combination of a lot of the factors. And then a question in from Valpo Viking Baseball 17U. Why don't we have a plan B, a zone or similar on defense, or some clear out or ISO plays on offense? Because you can't out-execute everyone all the time. To touch on the defense part first, Purdue really hasn't played a zone since 1980. Gene Cady would have never considered a zone defense. It was obviously legendary for a while that this state would never consider a zone with Bob Knight and Gene Cady. Matt Painter really doesn't either. Steve Lutz handles most of the defensive stuff these days, but he hasn't had any inclination to throw a zone at a team. If you aren't a zone team, though, if you aren't normally playing a zone, it can fall apart really quickly. Zones take a lot of discipline, and they work best with a lot of length. And, you know, that's tough to do. Purdue doesn't have a lot of length. You've seen this, though, throughout a lot of the Matt Painter era. They haven't always been the longest team at the 2 and the 3 spot, and it can be really hard to rebound out of a zone at times. Purdue will double the post. That's about as exotic as they tend to get on defense. It is straight up man-to-man. And in terms of the question as to why, that's just a philosophical thing. That's a Matt Painter thing. That's really what it comes down to. But I will say the defensive efficiency numbers this year were pretty good. So I don't see the defensive philosophy changing much. And as far as the offense goes, you know, Purdue lets their post players go one-on-one quite a bit, especially with Travion Williams. I'd go as far to say Travion Williams doesn't take a lot of the isolation opportunities he gets. I think sometimes he looks to pass a little too often. I think we'll see more isolation-type plays in the backcourt with Jay Nivey going forward. But right now, I think he's Purdue's only guard that you really want to go isolation. I think he's the only guy who's a good enough ball handler and big and strong enough to make stuff happen around the rim in a lot of traffic. He's by far the most skilled guard Purdue has. You know, Newman isn't there as a ball handler. Stefanovic, more of a spot-up shooter. He can penetrate when he, has a step on his defender, but doesn't do that a ton. Hunter could probably do more of it in theory, but he's not, a big guy who is going to take a lot of contact well. Isaiah Thompson's pretty small. I don't know that he's a great go-to-the-rim guy. I don't think it's as much of a refusal to do it. Both Carson Edwards and Vincent Edwards did it quite a bit. I just think more right now the personnel isn't as suited for clear-out or ISO plays as maybe you would like. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for spending time with me this morning. Remember to follow the show on Twitter at BoilersBeyond and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I'm still figuring out a schedule for the offseason, but I think we'll be back to put a wrap on the NCAA tournament and preview some of the offseason for the Big Ten before moving into a spring football recap. If you have any ideas for future episodes over the summer, we're in the down part of the year, send me a message. Let me know. I'd be happy to hear from you all. Until next time, try and enjoy the rest of the madness.